So with me, two really expert people in their own fields who know a lot about the ins and outs of the constitutional and royal niceties, if you like, and subtleties that have been thrown up by the events of the past 6 months or so. Bronwen Maddox of the Institute for Government and the journalist and royal commentator Robert Hardman, who writes for the Daily Mail. It's a pleasure to have you both with us again. Can we start on matters constitutional, Bronwen? Because lots of questions have been asked in the last few weeks, certainly since Boris Johnson came to power, about the way that the executive has interacted with Parliament and indeed with the palace, and I'll be asking Robert about that angle in a moment. What's been thrown up in terms of issues there, and what would you want people to really focus on?
Well, we've had a long wrestling match, if you like, an arm wrestling match between the Parliament and the executive, the government, over this. And a lot of these things are coming to a head in this. There is, of course, the question of whether this Queen's speech means anything and whether he's getting the monarch to read out what is essentially a pre-manifesto, a campaigning document. But then you've got questions about what Parliament can make him do. Parliament has already passed this bit of legislation, the Ben Act, saying that if by the 19th he hasn't got either their agreement for a deal, and he's got that from the EU, or their agreement for no deal, then he must ask for an extension. Have they really forced him to do that? Or has he found a way round it, as you've heard mutterings that he might have done? Then you've got the oddity, what if Parliament votes down this Queen's speech, but yet doesn't agree for a general election? Now, in times past, before something called the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, that would have been gone pretty quickly to a no-confidence vote. But a rare thing, the last time that happened was in 1924. And but now we might be stuck in a kind of limbo under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, where he couldn't get this Queen's speech through saying what he wanted to do, but Parliament won't quite agree to a general election because of other manoeuvrings, for example, wanting a second referendum. Hence this
phrase, zombie parliament.
That's been used for many reasons, but it really comes down to the fact that, and that's not a constitutional point, that's a really point about a government without a majority. Can it get anything done? And
in a corner, no ability to move, and no room for manoeuvre at all. That would be...
Well, very little. Yeah. But of course he's still got a tiny bit, and it hangs on this manoeuvring that is not going on in Parliament, but going on with Brussels, about whether or not he can get a deal.
Which overshadows this. Robert, there's been a lot of talk, and you can tell us about this, about possible tensions between government and the palace. Concerns in some quarters that the Queen in some ways being dragged into the political process, and that is improper and that is inappropriate, and that there are concerns within royal circles about that. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there's certainly been a degree of exasperation in recent weeks and months over what's happened with the prorogation that wasn't. And there is a nervousness about the Queen, as you say, being dragged into politics. I mean, that's really been an issue since as Bronwen mentioned, this Fixed Term Parliaments Act. It takes us into sort of uncharted waters. But today, though, I think there is a strong sense. I don't get any feeling that the Queen or anyone at the palace feels put out by coming today. I think there's a real sense this is a sort of constitutional reboot. Right. This is putting the Queen back where she belongs at the heart of things. People have said, well, this is a sort of a sham Queen's speech, because what happens if she has to do it all over again? I don't sense any reluctance, though. I think to be here, I think there's a real sense. Don't forget, it's now 2.5 years since we had a state opening, but it's 3.5 years since we had a proper state opening with the crown and the carriages and all the trimmings. Back then, David Cameron was still Prime Minister, so it's a long time since we've seen what we're about to see today.
Well, that's an interesting point, because some people were, in fact, because of the circumstances and because of the uncertainty and because of the possibility of another one coming up soon, that maybe today we wouldn't have had the full pageantry, the full ceremonial, but we are getting this.
We are getting it. I mean, we're getting all we've seen already, that wonderful scene of the Yeomen of the Guard doing their search of the cellars. Very shortly we'll see the Queen with all the regalia. A few tweaks, sensible tweaks, given the passage of time. So for the first time at a full state opening, she won't be wearing the imperial state crown where she sits on the throne. It'll be on a cushion. It weighs over 2 pounds, and wisely, I think she said, I'll bring it, but I'll put it on a cushion. She did the very first state opening she did, incidentally, in 1952. She didn't wear it then because she hadn't been crowned. The coronation hadn't happened. But little things like that. But overall, we are seeing this great tableau, this pageant vision that shows the constitutional order of things, the Queen in Parliament, the Lords, the Commons. It's a sort of clear, very visual definition of the way things work and have always worked. And I think the Queen will be very glad to be back in centre stage.
On centre stage, reading the speech, which has been prepared by the government. We're told there'll be more than 20 bills listed in this Queen's speech. We'll see when it's delivered. Of course, the question then is, how do they get delivered? Will they get delivered? How will they be funded? I mean, what does this Queen's speech amount to in terms of a practical programme of government? What would the answer to that be?
Well, we got a taste of it at the Conservative Party conference not that long ago, and a lot of money for public services was one of those things, and the polls suggested that was extremely popular with the public, though people did ask the question of how it was going to be funded. That doesn't have to be spelt out in this, though we've heard also that a budget might be coming up on the rails as well.
Of course.
To explain exactly those points. But you'll get all that bit about what a government would intend to do, quite aside from Brexit. But then part of the interest is going to be what exactly the government tries to say about Brexit in this. For example, whether it says we're going to leave on October 31st and that it may bring a deal before then. Anyway, the wording on that will attract some interest, and all that is being manoeuvred as we talk.
We will focus on that and indeed on what Robert's been saying. Thank you both for coming in. Good to have you with us, Robert Hardman and Bronwen Maddox. Thanks very much indeed.